That was yeah, like, but I wasn't like officially working in this space. It was more of like, hey, like this is cool. You should know about it. And I had learned about Bitcoin from Tumblr because I was a Tumblr girly back in the day, and I used to love using Tumblr. Um, but with NFTs, everyone kept talking about them, and it was my partner at that time. Well, actually, currently, but he was essentially like, "You should look into this, and I think you would actually find this space interesting." But I was quite nervous to fully commit, I guess, and it was a little bit scary because I didn't understand. It felt like a whole new language, and so I slowly started with DAOs. I was a part of SheFi and Kernel, and that helped me transition into the space. And I started DAOing, so I was a part of Protein, Bankless DAO, Radar, and Gitcoin as well later on. And I think case studies, like I did a bunch of different things like partnerships and this and that. But the way I got into grants specifically is because I would constantly see grants announcements. And that time, the bull market was at its peak. Everyone was talking about grants. And there wasn't a lot in terms of figuring out and deciphering and really just kind of sharing like more around like, hey, what happens in these programs? What happens after a grant is given out? Like there was no actual like content around that. And so I got connected to Eugene, who was heading MetaGov at that time. And he had started this project where it it was essentially a request to fund a project which would be studying grants. We spoke and we realized like we both were super interested and curious, and we started um, researching grants. And so we studied 13 grants programs in 2023. Um, and the whole point was to really understand like this black hole. Like there's over $1 billion that's been given out in grants funding. So what happens in these programs? What are challenges? What are opportunities? What are learnings? And how can we really help uncover that? So that's how we started. And that's how I got into the grant space, because it was through like that was the first big report that I did. But before that, I had been doing case studies on quadratic funding use cases on different Gitcoin rounds as well. And I had learned a lot from that perspective, but this was really covering a lot of different ecosystems and a lot of different kinds of grants programs. Yeah, so that's how I got started.
That's amazing. It almost sounds like I think we have like the grants expert here with us. Um, So my next question is like a lot of us don't actually know like in depth about how grants work and who they're actually for and how can people actually participate in getting like in the grant ecosystem even if they're not the ones who want to like probably get funded. So can you tell me a little bit about like how the grant space actually works? What are the kind of different grants available and platforms where somebody can go look for a grant from? And how can somebody get involved if they're like absolutely new to this?
So that's a really good question, and there's a lot of questions there. So um, I'd say it depends, and I say that because there's different kinds of programs. There's different kinds of even within each ecosystem, there's multiple kinds of grants a lot of times, and so it really depends on which ecosystem you're starting from. And it depends on what you want to do. If you want to build an app, if you want to create content and educate people, if you want to organize community things, if you want to do something more technical, if you want to do more research related stuff. So, depending on what your actual goal is, I would encourage anyone who's looking for a grant to start looking at different ecosystems and start exploring. Hey, if if there's funding in one, what does it look like in another ecosystem? And sometimes what you'll see is there are similarities. So if you're looking at an L2, a lot of times the metrics that people care about are going to be bringing more activity, bringing more wallets. You need to think through when you're thinking about decision makers, like why did they start the program? And then what do success metrics look like? So what are they assessing based on? If it's a generic grants program, I do think now it's a little bit more sophisticated in terms of what program managers look for and operators look for. So if it's a little bit more generic, a few things that do make a difference is how well the grant application is written, how well you can communicate why this would be a really good idea and why this is the team. It's almost like fundraising where you're pitching something and you need to represent yourself well. I come across so many grant applications that are very chat GPT written, and not to say there's anything wrong with using chat GPT, but when I read a human element and a human touch, when I feel like there's an actual voice, it makes a difference, right? Um, Arm yourself with facts because the person who's reviewing, especially if they've got a lot of applications, they don't have all the time in the world to look through every single detail. So position yourself for success. Really showcase and highlight anything that you've done, any metrics that really did lead to results, and anything that can be impressive and would count as credible is really helpful. So look, those are like a couple of basic starting points. In terms of what works, I'd say any kind of initial proof of reality. And what I mean by that is if you want funds for organizing an event, maybe start with a couple of smaller scale meetups that you can, where you can prove that, hey, I'm credible, I can get this done and I can do it well, and really focus on effectiveness there, right? So start small and then grow bigger. With even our own grant support, the first time we did it, we only had 2 funders. The next time around, and full credit to Eugene for who's leading on the fundraising front, but because we had shared and showed that, hey, this report is really useful to different ecosystems, the second time around there were a lot more programs who wanted to be included and who wanted to fund the research, and it just was a lot easier to do it the second time around than it was the first time around. In a similar way, if you can get a smaller grant and then you ask for another one, which would get to more results and where you can do a lot more things, that's a really great way to start. Then when it comes to the kinds of grants, I think every ecosystem is different. If an ecosystem is very developed and they've gone past that initial attraction stage, you probably are going to have a little bit of challenge trying something very initial and basic, right? So the kinds of challenges or the kinds of projects they would want are probably a little bit more sophisticated. It would probably be better to go for grant programs and ecosystems that don't have as much visibility and awareness, and who could use that, are actively investing into building brand awareness, that are building community, that kind of want that visibility and amplification. So it really depends on what you're trying to do, and then try to like match almost, right? It's like matchmaking where you need to think through what you can bring to the table and who would be able to value and benefit off of it. And almost like fundraising, if you've been a founder or been in startups or in sales and partnerships, right? You need a lot of different a lot of different pitching essentially. So you can have different pitches to different ecosystems, and you might get a lot of rejections before you get an approval and before someone can really buy into what you're doing. But it would be really good to show up to community calls, look at where a community hangs out, where are the decision makers, try to understand what their needs are, try to really don't just have like this generic idea. I'd say like go a step further to really understand what's valuable and what can get you that approval. And yeah, I think like that's a bunch of starting points.
That was like really insightful. So thank you so much for sharing that. So just bouncing off of that, I wanted to ask you. So when somebody is applying for a grant, I've noticed that like the space has changed so much since 2018 until now. Now you have reputation scores like Gitcoin Passport and Karma Gap scores and all these like different platforms that like help you build your on-chain reputation. And
Yeah.
also, I've seen some platforms also tie in with things like protocol or build to give you a reputation score, something like that. So as a person who's participating in the grant space for the first time, or somebody who's not familiar with all these things, what are some of these parameters that they can start like building on? Like you said, like attending community calls may be something that helps add to that, but what are some of these parameters that they need to look out for in addition to the KPIs for their company or the startup or the idea?
Well, every grant decision maker wants results and they want to see success. You'll be surprised at the number of projects that get funding and then don't end up delivering what they have promised. They don't stick to timelines, they don't stick to deadlines. So if you can reference and showcase that what you did worked for another project, I think that's a very promising signal. So always be trying to measure and get as many metrics as you can. I think there's a misconception where people sometimes think, hey, I can't organize a big event. I don't think you need to always organize big events. If you had 30 people show up, but the 30 people were so interested that they, for example, downloaded a wallet, took an action, whatever that looks like for whatever ecosystem we're talking about, right? And you're able to make a difference, that's way better than just like logo visibility at an event with thousands of people and it makes no difference. So value and perception is different. Of course, it depends on every person as well, depending on what they value or what makes a difference to them. So I think having and equipping yourself with as many metrics and data as possible. And then with Karma, what's really good is that you can obviously showcase what results you got and you can update and people can see what's happening. So I think that's really great too. If you are at events, try to connect with ecosystem teams and try to figure out like what is making a difference. But I think on the flip side, look at who got grants and try to look at results if there's any reporting of any sorts, right? And if you see any gaps where you feel like you can do a better job, or if you can be complimentary in a way where it's like, hey, you put money into so and so kinds of projects or this project, I think that's why you should be interested in what I'm doing because we've been able to do 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is why it works. It's a very different conversation because you've done your homework. So I'm a big fan of being over prepared when it comes to how you position what you're doing. One thing that I've noticed is a lot of builders and projects just don't know how to articulate what they're doing well in a way that is context relevant, right? So they'll have like a 5-minute pitch that I just don't care about because I have nothing to do with it. And now they've not only wasted time, but they also, not to say it's wasting time, but it's just you've lost attention. And that was one thing, even so we recently ran an accelerator program. And that was the one thing we kept trying to get program like builders to understand with their projects was, hey, get better at becoming relevant to who you're talking about, context switch, understand what is going to be helpful so you can get that grant or you can get that amount of funding. So I think that's good. We actually just published a grants program and analysis report, literally like I'd say like 30 minutes ago. So I can probably link it in the chat box. But essentially, I think there is a whole list of metrics that we've identified that can be useful depending on what category you're looking at a grant for. From events to content and awareness to technical metrics too. And I think that could be a good starting point to showcase what can move the needle from that perspective. And I think that could be a good starting point for anyone who wants to take a deeper dive into metrics.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I think my last question to you would be that you have also worked in the nonprofit space yourself, and you're also an active, activist, and you talk about inclusivity in the space a lot. And I personally feel like grants in the past have been more biased towards, people from a certain geography or people who are from a more technical background. And I feel like there's been a shift like since 2022. Like there have been more grants coming up for artists and creators. So I wanted to understand like how you personally see the grant landscape becoming more inclusive, and what are these different trends that you're seeing, like bringing about that change. And I also want to know about how Octant is working towards like making the grant ecosystem like more inclusive to people who don't actually like usually get access to these things.
Great question. We're already here. You're going to get me in trouble with asking me these questions because I tweet and then I act like no one sees my tweets. And I forget that people can actually see my tweets. I used to speak about inclusivity and diversity. So like that was a mission in life, right? That's what I spent a good chunk of my life working towards. And the last couple of years, I have not brought up that word, not in panels, not in my writing. It's something I deeply care about, but I work towards it without mentioning it because I think the most important, most deserving projects and grantees deserve more. Like, and I guess like what I mean by that is without like calling it what it is, like working towards it, right? I don't need to say, hey, I'm looking for women on a panel. I'm just going to find women who are deserving without like kind of adding that. I'm not going to say, hey, like, I'm South Asian or I'm brown or like I'm from like a certain demographic that's always like underrepresented or whatever. Like, I am personally very conscious of the privilege that I have because of how I sound, because of who I am. But even with the accelerator program, I was working with projects from every part of the world, and I could hear it was actually very hard for me because I heard some of the projects with the most traction who were clearly being discriminated against because of how they sound. And it was quite frustrating to see them not get recognition from some ecosystems where they have added so much value And to see them like so massively undervalued, it actually pissed me off so much. I wanted to yell, probably do a lot more things, but I'm not. We're not gonna talk about violence today. But yeah, I was quite frustrated at that, and so I think, how do we solve that, and how do I personally approach it? When we did the research and study, anytime we asked questions from any of the program managers around how they thought about it, they had no metrics and they kind of didn't really care. And it's not a topic that you bring up because I feel like it immediately shuts people off. So the way to kind of bypass that sometimes is literally, like, every person plays a different role in this industry. Some people need to be talking about it. Some people need to help make decisions behind the scenes without even bringing it up. And I think when you can trust people, so we have Natalie, who's also part of our council and who's one of the best voices when it comes to making sure that decisions that are being made can be trusted, and just with a lot of alpha and spicy takes, and just has so much context on like so many projects, right? So ensuring that her and then anyone who's got good judgment can be part of at least whatever decision making that we're making, Octane included, right? Because with Octane, we were very conscious of who the decision makers are, what they've contributed, because they need to have context, and how good they are at what they're doing, right? It doesn't just make sense to have a diverse group that has no context, or like it's just, yeah, I guess it doesn't make sense. I'm probably not being very articulate. I haven't had a lot of coffee today. But from the Octane perspective now, I think one thing that we've noticed, and we're actually intentionally putting a lot of effort into, is going past, and I'd say like going more global. So we have a pretty big growing Spanish community. We've got a growing Portuguese community. We've got a pretty big community that's growing now in Africa as well. And so we are trying to empower community leaders from these communities to help grow our project and obviously our communities, right? And we're coming up with programs that can help give them the kind of leadership that can help them feel more empowered, but also invested into the community, because it's not about being extractive. So we are putting funds to getting GLM into the hands of these communities to make sure they can make decisions and they have an equal say when it comes to governance. And that's probably one of the best ways is, right, like you kind of grow that pie, and you intentionally do it in a way that grows, in a way that everybody wins. So at least that's how we're doing it from the Octane perspective. From another layer of grants and what we did with the community fund, where the whole point was grow awareness and brand awareness and like GLM participation, well, Octane participation in our epochs. And so when we looked at grantees, we had grantees, for example, the reason why we also have a growing Spanish community, because Nacion Bankless were one of our grantees. They did a lot of awareness. So they created a lot of content in Spanish. They spoke about Octane at their in-person event. And now they have brought in a bunch of their community into the Octane community, right? So now that was so powerful. We saw a lot of results from that. And we're going to double down on having similar decisions with the second fund, because those learnings were invaluable to us. We had a lot of experiments, and we kept a close eye on looking at who's working really well, what really helps us grow, and who's doing it in a meaningful way. Because you can always tell when you're working with grantees, in terms of who's super invested, who's going to go the extra mile, and who's going to help in a way that makes a difference, right? You know which community leaders are super invested versus who just want to amplify their name. And I think like when you can work and you've worked with enough grantees and projects, you can tell the difference. And we've tried to create metrics and rubrics that help with that. And I just believe, like, you know, again, the more we grow, and like not just from like Western or North American regions, I think that's where the power is, just in terms of like people spending power. There's like a lot of metrics you can quantify it to. But yeah, I guess that's how we've done it. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think that answers it beautifully. And I think the part that struck me the most was, like that you're just enabling good decision makers to, make good decisions for the community as a whole. And I think like that makes the biggest difference of all. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. And hi again, Natalie. Thank you for coming over. Good to have you here.
I'm finally here.
Would you like to start off by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about like your journey into Web3 and also like the grant ecosystem?
We'll be here all day. So I'll try to make it as concise as possible. Shout out to Arlie. I absolutely love her. And so yeah, how did I get here? I'll just start there and we can work backwards. So there probably like 2016, 17, I don't know, one of those years. A guy, DJ Lethal Skills, who's like an OG like DJ from like Lebanon, and then also this guy Vandal, who's from Canada, but they were both in Malaysia at the time doing really cool stuff around social tokens. And I basically like stopped. I've known them for like many years throughout the international hip hop community, which is like a small circle, but huge at the same time. And so I kind of followed them. I'm like, what are y'all doing with this weird social token stuff? And I'd been in crypto for several years prior to that, but I wasn't attached to any community. I was just trading. And so they were basically like, well, we're doing music stuff and we're getting funded with these social tokens. And so I was, so they dragged me to this decentralized platform called Steemit, and it was like a whole new world to me. And so I just basically like jumped in head first and started to participate, and they basically introduced me to all the things and kind of shepherded me into this space in ways that I'm still in gratitude for. And so that's how I got to Web3. But just to kind of like fast forward to 2020, I was on Clubhouse and there were people talking about crypto, and I was like, what are y'all talking about? That is not real. I was like, that is misinformation, people. And they were sitting in a room with like hundreds of people and like eventually like thousands of people like misinforming people. And it was, to be very frank, it was gross. And so I'm like, y'all can come to my room and I got y'all. And so let me move. And so yeah, they were basically like running these weird rooms, and I was like, nah, we gotta make our own room. And so I basically told them, excuse my flip-flop songs, my flip-flop sounds. And so I gotta move. We got all the noise out there. And so yeah, that's how I got to Web3 and crypto, and I just started hosting rooms on Clubhouse, and then eventually NFT tips started as a bunch of people who had the same experiences. And so yeah, we started hosting rooms around social impact, and because nobody's really talking about it at that time. And so, and we just kind of grew. And so we onboarded probably like almost like 100,000 people, just ushering people every single day, 24/7 into crypto and then Web3. So that's how I got here.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I also like know you from Clubhouse. I used to attend like blockchain gospel and a bunch of like rooms. You and Lo Cece, Kane, and a bunch of people used to host back then. And I don't know. That's what it got me excited about like creating in the space. Like you guys. So thank you so much for that. So like you mentioned right now that you have been using crypto to fund a lot of nonprofit work and public goods. So let's start with that. Like you've also been a part of ApeDAO and Pizza DAO, and you've personally done a lot of fundraisers for hip hop artists and like different like artists in different spaces who don't even necessarily belong to crypto. So can you tell me a little bit about that journey? How did that journey start, and how's that going for you, and what are some of the challenges you faced, and like how's that been?
Yeah. So prior to this whole crypto thing, like me getting really serious about it, I come from like the nonprofit, but also like the world of entertainment. So my whole entire career has been kind of mismatch of like different experiences. I was running festivals and doing all kinds of projects, but it was so hard to get funding, at least in an equitable way. You'd have to fill out 9,000 pages of like paperwork. And I'm like, I need like a new job description for like all this paperwork I got to finish. And it's very challenging kind of, especially in the European like cultural market, it was very challenging to traverse all of that. And I'm like, there has to be a better way to like fund arts and culture in a way that's equitable, and I can get money to artists like directly without going through all this like bureaucracy. It's actually pretty wild. We could talk about that for another day, but so this crypto and kind of the vehicles that existed here and the things that I created for myself and my people, my folks, is it kind of like leveled out the playing field, so to speak. And so I would run mutual aid projects on Facebook, and Facebook kept banning me. They're like, you cannot talk about this weird, sketchy thing. And this is like back in the days. And so you cannot talk about crypto. So I think I got banned like 60 times or something. It's pretty wild. But I was doing these mutual aid projects, and there's one occasion we raised like $40,000, and we were just giving money to like Black women and non-binary folks and queer folks, whatever folks ID'd themselves as, and we just gave them money without kind of the bureaucracy. And these are folks that really needed to like pay their bills or to get dental assistance or like whatever the thing was. We didn't ask you to like provide, excuse my language, but this is how I describe it, poverty porn. Just tell us you need funding and we'll give you the funding, and we trust that you're going to do with it what you say you'll do with it. And so crypto kind of like expanded that work into the space. And like I know that there's not a lot of folks like working on like mutual aid projects, at least on the scale that was happening during the pandemic. But I also realized that this space, the way to kind of galvanize folks around social impact in ways that are less capital vulture capitalistic and also like less bureaucracy in some ways. And so yeah, I've just kind of been doing different projects since then. And so yeah, insert list here. So yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. And like you mentioned just now, you started by just finding funds for people who actually needed to pay their day-to-day bills, and by figuring out different ways of crowdfunding and just getting funds to them. And I feel like since then until now, like your journey has also like evolved a lot. Like right now within the artist space, we kind of see you like a legend. Like if anybody needs funding in the space, especially like a music artist, they go to you. The investors in the space, like who's offering what grant, what artist residency program is available right now. You know all of that. So I wanted to like sort of understand like what's like how has your perspective also shifted like on how you're arranging the funds like in unorganized way to now actually like getting funded from DAOs and like through proposals. And how have you seen like funding change for artists in the space?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how things have changed since I've been in the space, and also in comparison to I also serve on like grant councils and other funding bodies like outside of crypto. And so it's interesting always to draw the comparison between all of these experiences. And what I will say is that how spicy can it be? So I was a part of like some humongous like DAOs. I was like on the forefront of like all this DAO things happening in 2019, 2020. And I saw very closely and I was very observant, and I saw many people like circle jerking money around to themselves. And I'm like, is that what we're doing over here? And when I realized what was happening, I started calling folks out, and it caused some very sour taste in folks' mouth. But people that know me know I don't care. And so I basically was like, can we actually use some of this money to like fund creatives and artists instead of your rich friends? Like they already got $10 million. Like, bro, like, do they need any more money? And so people are pretty frustrated. So I kind of banded with some folks out of Seed Club, and we built this thing called M Club, and we basically raised like 6 figures to initially like fund artists. But I was like, we gotta fund like Black and brown folks and folks who have less access to this funding and are not in all these DAOs. They're not in all the space. They're not going to be in your Telegram chats or all these things because it's inaccessible, and your language is just a whole nother ball game. And so we raised this money, and I saw a bunch of folks who were donating. They're like, well, we want to spend money on this person. I'm like, that's your homeboy that also has $10 million. And so it was this whole fight, and we basically have kept that money, some of it in the treasury since for the last like year and a half, 2 years. And so I've been advocating for them to like really spend that money on where it needs to be sent. And so that whole experience, just going to battle with folks about that, really changed my perspective about how folks operate in the space. And it continued to fuel me in a way that when I kick indoors, I'm always thinking about those experiences. When I kick indoors, I'm always thinking about the challenges and kind of barriers people throw up so that only certain people can get funding in the space and other folks are kind of shafted out. And so it can be very political, and it can be very systematic in the way that this happens. I'm not saying every foundation or every funding thing kind of operates like that, but in the DAO space specifically, I did see a lot of that. And so I stopped participating in DAOs except for Pizza DAO and a few other Radar and some others. And a part of that was because of my experiences across the board. And so yeah, want to fund artists and I want to fund folks who have less access to these fundings. Like I see a lot of people who have like millions of dollars, they get all the things, and I'm like, y'all proven anything? Are you gonna do anything with that money? Like a tweet is not impact, bro. Like and so,
You'd be surprised. A lot of people think tweeting is the most impactful thing, tweeting to the same people all the time.
So yeah, that's my long rant, my long dissertation about that. But I've had a lot of experiences over the last several years. In Near, that's a whole battle for another day. But I take those experiences with me, and I can be negative and throw up the drama if I want, but I don't. I use that to fuel me to do the work that I need to do and be out there advocating for folks. So that's, yeah, in a nutshell.
Thanks for sharing that. So I wanted to ask you, like, driving off of this question itself, in your experience, what do you think is easier for, like if somebody is just like applying for the first grant, or is a new builder who really wants to build something for a particular protocol, or a particular chain, do you think it's easier to apply for like ecosystem grants, like bigger grants or like hackathons, or is it better to I don't know, like maybe join smaller cohorts and look for smaller like funding rounds through these smaller like batches of like cohorts, or smaller investment opportunities, and maybe work their way up to bigger ecosystem grants? Like how do you think they can like start?
I think Arlery, let's call you by your Twitter name, made a really great point earlier, and I just want to underscore that. I feel like people run to go get a grant, and they haven't really pushed out a prototype or the thing yet. I would encourage people to actively like experiment, to like try to build as much of the thing that you can, but I also recognize the barriers and just starting to build when you don't have resources, you don't have funds, but the space is very participatory. So can you lean on other folks that you're in community with to help you build the thing or build like some aspect of it? And so you have some social proof of this thing that you've been dreaming of or want to do before you approach these foundations. So I think you could read like all of Arlery and Eugene's like reports and kind of come to the conclusion that there are kind of tiers of funders in this space. The foundations operate very differently than some of the other funders in this space. Most of them, you got to politic a little bit, and you also got to get in the door. How do you get in the door? Like you obviously have to kind of meet the people you need to meet, and kiss babies and shake hands, and you have to understand that aspect of it. But there's other funders, like I'm not going to name any collectors, but there's collectors out there that will want to seed your projects. There are several of them out there that continuously do that work. There are devs who may want to do some pro bono work for you or in exchange for something else that they need. And so can you utilize kind of bartering to actually get yourself off the ground? Because some of these funders want to see that you actually have something tangible, or you're ready to go, or you're ready to get out of the gate with something. And they don't necessarily want to fund you and your beginning stages or your seed kind of seeding ground, as I like to call it, of your project. And so I would also say that there may be some like local funders, like your local arts council, that will fund like an event or a certain type of project. And so you have to learn the language of these funders and try to figure out, how can I kind of maneuver, how can I adopt like their particular language, and it changes. So I encourage people just to try to build as much as you can before you start approaching people for actual funding. And if you can raise funding, like Jamie Cornelia raised, don't quote me on this, Jamie, like 10 ETH or something from her peers, and she crowdfunded that. And so some collectors came out and really supported Jamie. Jamie has built a lot of stuff and has contributed to the community. And then lastly, I'll say, have you contributed to the actual community? Because if you're doing peer-to-peer crowdfunding, some people are not going to want to fund somebody who actually is not active in the space. They're or just sitting on the sidelines, they're wanting to get some funding or not supporting other people. So there's a psychology behind that. So I hope that was enough,
And like, I think just to add on to everything that Natalie just said, I'm just going to quote John Woo here, but do the disgusting thing. He gave a session for the program, and someone asked, like, what does that mean? And he was just like, you know what, like, do the thing that needs to be done, go that extra mile. And just to add on here, I think it's a crowded space where you're not the only person applying for a grant, right? Especially if there's hundreds or thousands of grants. So literally go the extra mile. Like find people, tweet at them, be in their inbox, give before you take. Literally just try to get, build, be recognizable. I think that's what it is. Like be familiar. And go the extra mile in terms of that. And so definitely give before you take, before you ask for a grant, show what you're doing, connect, see what people actually care about, see if you can connect, not because you're asking something, but because there's something that you can actually reference and contribute to. And I think that's also very important because it that works, right? And if you can go to an event in person, trying to connect in person. I know like event hopping is a thing, but for people that are just starting off, this is an incestuous space. Everyone's connected. It's horrible how incestuous it is, and how I have horror stories, and I'm a little bit traumatized from studying grants and looking at all the challenges that come with it. But try to bridge that gap. And kind of like what Natalie said too, like start building a community that would want to fund you. There are a lot of community rounds that have started up, especially with Gitcoin, for example, right? Where even if you've built a strong enough community, maybe you could qualify for that. There's other rounds for sure that could definitely be applicable there as well. But you don't start alone. So build with other people, try to build something that has numbers and makes a difference and that people can care about. And not everything. So there's like grants that have cycles, and then there's those that people don't talk about. But if you have someone who's convinced that you can bring value, they will change things for budgeting. So play the long game. Even if you're not getting something immediately, maybe 6 months from now or next year, you're able to get funding or whatever, however budgeting works in that ecosystem. So, people are accountable for metrics. Whatever helps them grow their metrics and gets them to their success, like contribute to that. And I think that's part of getting like that funding.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And like just my last question is, I feel like a lot of people tend to chase after like the new shiny L2 or something because they're offering grants, and that tends to happen a lot in the space. And I feel like that's also very distracting, because some people have some great projects that they're building here that they completely uproot to move to something new and adapt to something new. So my question like would be like, does it really make a difference? Like, if you're building something really truly great, does like your project being on a different L2 or being on a different like protocol, or like being completely native to just that thing really matter in the space? Or are there grants that are chain agnostic, like product agnostic as well?
Are you asking? Oh, Natalie, go for it.
I was just gonna say, one of the things I always told people on Clubhouse was people over protocol, because so many people are like, they're like adhered with like super glued to some of these chains and protocols, and to some extent, there are some chains, protocols, whatever the thing is, that actually do provide value to creatives and artists and devs or like whoever you may be. However, at the end of the day, I always feel like if you can fit in or you can like get into like other places that are in alignment with whatever you're doing, like do that instead of like being hyper super glued, because then you get kind of boxed into this. A great example, and I won't name my good friend, she's a musician and she recently launched on, I'm going to say Cardano, and she didn't actually do well despite this person having like a really robust and like beautiful community, and I absolutely love them. However, if the chain is not supporting you or the chain's not giving you kind of assets to be able to kind of float in a way that adds value to whatever you're doing or your launch or whatever the thing is, I don't know if you should be super glued to that. And even if they did, I still don't think you should be super glued to these chains. I believe you should be super glued to your community in alignment with your values. You should be super glued to whatever the thing you're doing is, instead of kind of chasing. Teal said, "Don't go chasing waterfalls, because you gonna run into a dry river and you're gonna be looking around like, dang, I spent all this time floating all these, working with all these chains and like being all about them when I should have been all about myself." And it sounds selfish, but as somebody who probably made NFTs.tips literally made all these chains like hundreds of millions of dollars, and then I look back, I'm like, we could have made ourselves hundreds of millions of dollars if we spent less time onboarding people onto these chains in the way that we did, and found some balance and actually onboarded people more so into their own kind of cipher, their own kind of ecosystem, and taught people more so how to build those ecosystems. Instead, we kind of spent a lot of time showing people how to upload a POAP or do this thing on this L2, or find random like moon cats, like all these things. And I don't regret any of that, because I know tons of people who found value in all those things. But I just urge people to really invest in yourself. And if these chains come along and they like, hey, we really want to support you and really rock with you as the artist, or like, let's collaborate, and it makes sense and the contract is, supreme, then great. But otherwise, I beg y'all, if y'all learn nothing else from me, please invest in yourself, center yourself and your people and your community. You'll feel much better and less susceptible to being played by some of these people. I won't be too spicy today, but that's it.
I think as a builder, you're also like, you owe it to yourself. Get the fun. Like if you're getting funding from a no-name layer 2, get it. If that's what you need to launch and get some amount of traction, versus a big name one that gives you nothing. Because so another learning that we did have from our research, and that I think like programs is starting to become more sophisticated, but funding is not the only thing that makes a difference. It's what else can the program bring for a grantee? Are they bringing financial support? Sure, that's the bare minimum, right? But marketing support, partnership support, connections, intros, if there's challenges even with hiring and stuff, it's almost like programs need to be so much better to add more value. And I think builders, especially good builders who've had traction and can move the needle for the ecosystem specifically, are in a really good place, because chains should be fighting for you if you've built something that has traction. And so I think like that's a position of privilege and power in a way. So, and I'd say the most funding is in the no-name L2s, like the ones that are struggling with exactly that kind of awareness that you can probably maybe bring, right? Or traction. It all goes back to traction and activity. And that's what they're spending on. So I don't think it makes a difference. I also don't think like sticking to one when you could be growing. I don't know. I think that's just a lot more valuable.
That makes total sense. Yeah, as a founder, like I feel like that's great advice. So thank you so much, Michelle, sorry, and Natalie, for coming over with us and spending Halloween with us on the stream, and sharing so much knowledge over here. Thank you so much. It was great, like interviewing you. I hope I was not too bad of an interviewer. I'm just like really
You're great.
Girl, bye.
You're great.
Michelle is very articulate, and you're an amazing interviewer. Don't second guess yourself. I'm gonna pump you up all the way.
Hell yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. This was
Thank
amazing.
you so much. All right, so now we're gonna have Po on stage, and she's going to have community strategy friends over, and we're going to have like a small fireside discussion about grants and how do we view grants in the space. So, Po, do you want to come back on stage?
Hi.
I love your. Hi.
Poan, you're so cute.
Oh, thank you. Well, everyone here is also very cute. And Rashida, you did an amazing job interviewing, and you are absolutely glowing. So just own that. And Sandra, so good to see you. It's been a
You
while.
too. It's been a minute. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I know when we were planning this month, Rashida had the idea of talking about grants. And then when we first launched the State of People, we would invite some of our common Web3 community strategy friends to just get on for a chat and talk about whatever's top of mind related to community building, Web3, marketing, new trends, new things we're seeing. And I remember you started this grants role. So it's really nice that you kind of cover both worlds. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I started at Charmverse as community lead, and then moved into this grants role over the last year, I guess, almost. So I've just been working with a lot of grants programs to set them up to use Charmverse to run their grants programs, which also turned into me helping them manage said grants programs. And we've also had the opportunity then to run our own, which has been really exciting. So I'm happy to be here to talk about it and geek out on grants and community.
Yeah, great. And were you able to tune in for any of the previous session? And it's okay if you didn't.
Towards the end, I was hoping to get in here sooner, and then the day has been getting away from me as I get ready to launch season 2 of Polygon's community grants coming up next week. So that's what I've been scrambling on today.
Oh, wow. Okay. So lots of overlap with the topic. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so we ran Polygon's community grants season 1, and it was great. And I was working closely with that grants team. And it's a huge grant program. So we're really honored to have it running on Charmverse. If people aren't familiar with Charmverse,
Maybe actually, just in case, always helpful to have some context.
Yeah,
I love
Charmverse.
Charmverse.
You know it?
Yeah, I've used it like in the past to apply for a grant. Like I used Charmverse, the platform, to like put in my application and everything.
I love it.
Yeah, but I've seen Chris Carella like write a lot about Charmverse, so that's how I was introduced to it. Please go ahead and let us know.
No,
like, how the
amazing.
platform works.
Chris
It's
Carella,
amazing.
he's famous in this space. So
Yeah.
Charmverse started kind of as a community tool to service DAOs and on-chain communities, and has now found itself in the grant space. We've been building out a really robust platform specifically for grants, working closely with Optimism actually, and kind of figuring out what they needed for their grants program. And now we're just seeing more and more programs joining Charmverse because of the capability. So really, it's great to host all of the information. And then we have an application that you can set up with whatever workflow works best for your community or program. You can do all of your evaluations on there. You can create databases, so you can have a snapshot of everyone's applications, permissions, whether you want everything to be public or private. And it's just, like I said, it's become a very robust platform. So that's what Charmverse is pretty much doing right now, which has been really exciting and great. Like I said, it's been great working with all these different programs. So Polygon worked with them on the first season, and they're about to launch season 2. And so we're just kind of revamping the program a bit, updating the application and rubric, because you learn a lot from season to season and the feedback and all of that. So that's about all I can give right now. But yeah, stay tuned, because they are hoping to launch next week if everything goes according to plan.
Very cool. And I'm sure there's some things you're waiting for a more official rollout. So we'll just be patient and see how that goes.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I wonder in that spirit of learning, because this was the sort of a new role you stepped into. It's been what, 4 months now
that I've been in the role. I mean, it's been like kind of getting into it, probably starting around last November. So about a year. But as in anything with Web3, I feel like it's all a learning experience, and you kind of need to throw yourself into it. And I am very much of the mind of just kind of like say yes to a new scary thing and kind of figure it out along the way. But there's also so much knowledge out there and kind people that are willing to share their knowledge. So I mean, look at you guys hosting like community calls and these kind of live streams, and it's to share knowledge and kind of get people in the know of what's going on. So while it can be scary, I always tell people, don't hesitate to reach out. Poan, when we first met, you were like, hey, let's hop on a call. I want to learn more about what you're doing, and it can be a very friendly, welcoming space. So I do love that.
I agree. And that's what it's really wonderful, because each of these monthly streams, actually, it's been a combination of Riley. I know you're somewhere backstage, just made a big announcement today, and I know Riley definitely deserves some respite between all of us. We bring different people up, sometimes from our friends group, from people we follow online, and so I've been learning a lot, meeting again friends of friends. So that's a good point.
It's a great space for that. And hey, Riley, are we bringing Riley up, or are they
back
hanging
No,
today?
I was giving space that it's okay to take a break this month. but I know they're somewhere.
Yes, yes.
So Sandra, I wanted to ask you something. Like since you mentioned that you worked on Polygon's grant round this time. So this time I saw a lot of like consumer apps get funded and a lot of like different kinds of products get funded, because in the past, like what I've noticed is Polygon is heavily invested in gaming and NFT and like I don't know, like a lot of like the new meta emerging tech stuff. So lately, I've been seeing a lot of like actually usable consumer products that were not necessarily Polygon products that are now introducing Polygon as a chain and coming on. So I wanted to understand like how was this process, like grant process, different from all the other grant processes Polygon has had in the past? Because I feel like this one has been like really successful. So like what has been different and how has their mindset like been different this time, like according to you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. So I'm not a reviewer, and then this, that was my first time. The last season was my first time working with them. So I know that they have their program that kind of goes through Thrive, and then they have this separate program, which is the community grants. And I believe the consumer crypto stuff usually happens on the other side of things. This last one, like I said, I'm not a reviewer, so I think they're just trying to really expand what they're bringing on chain for them, and everyone wants more builders and more applications. And the more you cast that wide net, the more they're going to get people in there. So, but because I'm not a reviewer, I haven't been on that side of things. I'm more doing the admin for them. I will say for the community side, it's all the community treasury board that ultimately decides who's getting funded. And if you go to the Polygon Charmverse space, you can definitely learn more about what they're looking for. All of that info is starting to be updated. So if you go to Polygon, they'll be launching that link pretty soon, and you can definitely go and check it out and see kind of what they're looking for this time, because they have changed it up from last season a bit.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. So do you mind me asking, when you experienced Charmverse, what grants were you looking at? Were you doing Optimism, Polygon? I mean, we've had a refi program, which is the one we actually ran.
Optimism, yeah, it was the Optimism grant. Yeah. So I could go there and I could see all the previous applications, and it was really good. Like, as somebody who was applying for like my first grant then, it was very easy to navigate.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and anyone listening, if you are applying to a grant and you're having any issues, drop into Charmverse. Someone, usually me, is always there to help and kind of direct you where you need to go if we can't help you. So, but it's always good to hear from users who have gone in there and to hear what their experience has been, because, grant writing is not easy. It's time consuming. You put so much time in there hoping that you're going to get it. And it can also be really disheartening. Sadly, I'm also the person that often sends out the "you've been declined" messages, which is no fun to tell anyone that, which it's very personal to people, so that's not always fun to be on that side of things either.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask another thing about Jamverse. So I've also seen Chris Carella use Jamverse for, I saw him use it throughout, like when he was building Purple DAO, for voting proposals on Purple DAO, and to, allot how much, percentage return or something somebody should get on Purple. I've seen him set up things like that. So can you tell me more about like maybe how even smaller communities could use Charmverse to set up governance models, without necessarily being in a grant form, but still like use it just for governance and like splitting rewards?
Absolutely. I've been so focused on grants lately, so now I need to shift to the community brain. So Charmverse, like I said, started out as a community tool, and it's very Notion-like. So if you're familiar with Notion, Charmverse, as soon as you step in there, feels very Notion-esque. The thing is, we wanted it to be more affordable, because with Notion, you're adding seats, you're paying by seats, and it just makes sense for Web3 to be able to have a community tool that doesn't cost a bunch, especially for a smaller community. And so we pretty much guarantee to be less expensive than Notion. It doesn't really make sense for like one person, right? But if you're collaborating in a space, It's just a great way to have a space to share all of that information, onboarding information. You can set up bounties or rewards to let people know the tasks that need to be done within that community that you can pay out for, not pay out for, just give credentials for, to say, look, these people showed up, they worked, they did the job. So we've implemented the credentials just to kind of start building reputation in there. And governance. So yeah, you can set up proposals. Chris has definitely run many proposals for Purple DAO, as have other communities. Set up proposals, set up your voting style. We are also integrated with Snapshot. So you can also vote in Snapshot and use all of their different weighted voting, quadratic voting, whatever you want to do, if that's the best way for your community. And you can vote in Charmverse, see the results in Charmverse as well as on Snapshot. But yeah, you can really just set these permissions. Who can vote? Is it because they have a token, because they have a specific role? You can token gate your space to make sure certain people can get in and have access to certain pages where other pages may remain public for everyone. So it really, you can get very granular with these permissions and share what you want and keep private what you want with just your core team. So yeah, it's been a really good tool to kind of help these communities get out there, share what they're working toward, onboard new members, and vote and get stuff done, working towards the goals they're looking to achieve.
That's kind of awesome.
Yeah. And we have all templates too. So if you're coming in as like an impact DAO, we have a template, so you don't need to start from scratch. And we just kind of have placeholders to guide you along the way.
Got it.
And yeah, go ahead.
I was just wondering, like, with Web3 social like platforms, now you have something like a Web3 social graph on the back end with which you can track someone's like, on-chain like social history. Like, so is there something like that in the grant space yet, from where you can track somebody's like previous funding landscape, like how many public goods, causes have they funded, things like that? Because I know about Gitcoin Passport and Karma Gap, but I was wondering, like, if there is like a unified, I don't know, funding graph or something in the back.
There is not, but I love that idea.
Okay.
And one I'm going to jot down because I think that's great. I think, as we talk about reputation and seeing what people are funding, people are very interested in that. We do show common organizations that you might share with someone. So if you came on and you looked at my profile, you would see anything that we kind of were both a part of, which is nice. And I could link my socials, so it'd be easier to reach out to me if you wanted to do that. But as far as like, you can also token gate with Gitcoin Passport scores. So we have that. So it's like we're almost there, but I love that idea of kind of seeing what people have funded in the past. And I'm taking a note of that. I think that's a really great idea, especially the more we work with grants. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. Mohan, did you have anything to share or add?
Yeah, no, I am just enjoying learning a lot. I mean, I know this was a topic, Aquarian, that you were sharing how you had gone through your own grant process. I was wondering if, one, you could share more about that.
Oh,
if
yeah.
you're into it in more detail. And then I also think it's fun that you've been on the, interviewer side. But if right now Xandra learned something from you and was able to get a piece of feedback or suggestion to jot down, it's fun when we can rotate that sort of role. And again,
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just tell you how I actually got interested in brands. So I'm an artist. I design for brands. I also do some content marketing for brands in the space. So I had like nothing to do with grants earlier, but I had voted on grant proposals before. Like I had friends in Pizza DAO or something going like, like, hey, I have this thing on Gitcoin. Can you please go vote with your wallet? So I participated in grants that way until 2021. And then in 2021, like I realized that, okay, like, so 2021 was the first time that I saw consumer apps and non like hardcore protocol based or network based or like, like hardcore tech applications get funded. And that's when I started like properly looking into the space. But I did not know how to participate. And then in 2022, like Octant launched a round with SheFi where they were funding female founders with a small grant round, and I participated in that. I was able to secure a small grant, and around this time, like Optimism, like Retro BGF was popping up, and I was seeing all these like different things about grants, and I was seeing artists participate in like these governance rounds. I saw Chris Color Light write like actively about purple around this time, so naturally, like I just like gravitated towards it, started researching about it, reading more into it. I don't think like I still have like great knowledge about like the grant space, because I still feel like a lot of it is still catering towards devs and somebody who's like used to submitting their GitHub and just that particular format. So I'm still like getting familiar with it, the format of it. How do you pitch for a grant? Um, but I just feel like this like new era is just going to be like about consumer apps and artists getting funded, and no code products getting funded. So I want to understand the space better, be able to build products and like participate more actively. That's why I just want to like get all this information from everybody. Yeah, I hope that
It's
answers your
definitely,
question.
yeah, it's definitely, like I said, grants can be so personal, right? They're funding people's projects and their, ambitions. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I think there's always a
absolutely.
lot to learn. I'm curious, but the ones that you have applied to, are you getting feedback or about why, if you did not get it, why you didn't get it?
So I have been going and asking some community members whose proposals did get funded about like, hey, like what do you think was missing on my proposal or something like that. But I've not like really getting any feedback from the team per se or something like that. It's just been like peers around me who are also applying with me. And I think like the biggest moment for me, like when I actually got interested in grants, was a friend of mine who's an artist, Cyber Shakti. She built a consumer app called Lens Post, which is basically like a meme, like artwork generator, which posts on Chain directly. And she's a female founder from India, and nobody in India wanted to fund her. Everybody laughed at her idea, and she just told me like, "I'm going to build it. I'm going to find the money. I'm going to make it happen." And she won like three grants consecutively. She was able to go to the stage, she was able to find engineers, she was able to build the whole thing out. And I don't know, like her life transformed, like in the sense that just from being this person from India who thought that like she doesn't have enough peers or supporters to fund her ideas, or nobody's going to take her seriously, to being so empowered and like having an international like audience. And even now those people still tell her like, hey, your product doesn't work, I'm not going to use it. She's like, I don't care, I have like 300k like daily active use. Like I had 300k daily active users at some point. So I don't know, that story was just so empowering to me, which I don't think would have been possible without grants. Like she would probably not get funded like in a traditional way, but grants made the whole thing possible, and the application is doing great. So yeah, so this is something like that gets me excited about that space.
It's great to hear those stories, right? And just like keep you going. That's the kind of stuff that keeps you going. I was asking about feedback because Polygon's actually the first grant program I've worked on where feedback was offered to declined applicants to help them understand why their application was declined, how they could improve it, or, like the pieces that were missing, which I definitely think is a really helpful thing for people, not just to be like, nope, and you have no idea why, and that's why it can be so disheartening. So I am now, any program I work with, I'm encouraging them to kind of open up that feedback and give that. It's time consuming, I know, but I think it is important for people not to just hear no, but to hear how they can do better.
That sounds amazing. I actually like haven't looked that much into Polygon grants. But like just seeing all the products that got funded this time, I have been actually like more curious now.
Check out season 2 because a little bit of alpha, they aren't specifically like on the landing page mentioning creators, but they're open to looking at those applications. And actually, if you go through the application on the categories or whatever, you can select creators. So it's a lengthy application, but it could be worth checking out. But yeah, I think feedback's huge for people. You know, I will say Polygon keeps their applications all private, but Optimism having it public, and a lot of other programs do keep theirs public. And I think that's really helpful to be able to learn from your peers, see what those winning
Absolutely.
applications look like. You know, what are other people doing? Because if you haven't done it, you're like, am I doing this right? What are these people doing? And it's nice to have that reference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, that was one of the pieces that was shared in the previous session of, look at the successful applications that were accepted and see if there's any themes, patterns. Maybe you're working on something that's complementary. And so I thought that was an interesting piece of advice.
Yeah, again, with Web3, sharing the knowledge, I think it's great to kind of have that transparency. I understand why not all programs want to share that information, but and some people don't want that information shared for fear someone's going to steal an idea. But I do like the sentiment behind it, like being able to look at someone else's and learn and compare or ask those people questions, even, right? Find out who those people are and be like, how can I do this better? Or collaboration purposes too. We actually this summer we were given the opportunity to run our own grant program through Thank Arb and Thrive. And it was great. It was nerve-wracking. It was my first program that I ran start to finish. And I learned a lot very quickly. But it was so great at the end. It was Refi and Arb. We were bringing regenerative finance to Arbitrum. That was the whole point. So I worked with all these really great refi projects, learned so many cool projects that are out there and what they're doing to like work towards saving our planet. And that's another story. But at the end, we did have everything open. Everyone could see each other's applications. And it was so cool to see the collaboration that came out of it. You know, people that were like, oh, you're working on this. That would really complement this. And just seeing how people were coming together and projects were just uniting. It was beautiful.
Is there a community chat for the Polygon grant community?
There is, if you go into the Polygon Discord, which I can share in our private chat, actually, I would suggest joining that. And there is a general grants channel. And that's where they will be announcing. I just shared it. That's where they will be announcing round 2, season 2. And I would just keep an eye on that. And like I said, I don't want to give a specific date, but it should be next week. And so you can go in and check it out. And it's going to be more of a rolling program. So they don't have an end date right now. I think they're thinking about it going kind of maybe through the end of the year. So definitely check that out. There will be chats there. And then once you're in there, there's a forum, like once the link gets opened up, there's a Charmverse forum where people can talk about stuff there too. But I definitely encourage you to join that. I did jump in just as you were kind of talking about not being beholden to a chain, right? Because oftentimes that's what these chains want. They really want.
Yes.
Are you committed to us? How are you staying committed to us? And I think you bring up a good point, you know, like you need to do this for your community and what's best for the people that you're serving, you know? And I get that these chains want, you know, they're giving the money, so they want you to stay on chain, but, you know, we can spread the love.
Yeah, but I've been noticing chains are also changing this. Like earlier, they used to be very strictly like, you're strictly going to be on Base and not on any other chain. But nowadays, they are open to, you know, a product expanding to different chains or not just like being chain agnostic, which I think is great. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, because for the success of whatever product or creator, you need to have yourself out there. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome, Sandra. I'm not going to take up more of your time. I was wondering, like, if there are any last words you would want to wrap up with, you know, for somebody who's trying to like understand the grant space, get into it, like, get their hands dirty. Like, any final words?
I mean, you know what? I'm going to share another link. Actually, I don't know how up to date it is, but it's definitely worth checking out. It's Charmverse. We created a grants tracker. So it's meant to help people find grants that are open in Web3 that might help you just find something that is a good fit for you. So definitely check that out. Like I said, I'm not sure how up to date it is. I should probably check with the person running it. But it just kind of has a calendar and you can go in there and see what's going on. But yeah, as far as just getting into grants, like I said, it can be overwhelming. These applications are a lot, but ask for friends, tune into these live streams. I just think the more people you talk to, they've gone through this process, they're happy to help. If you're doing it through Charmverse, drop us a line. Also on Charmverse, we do have suggestions for like how to run or how to write a winning grants proposal. I would say most of these are milestone based. Make sure you really take time on writing those milestones. That is oftentimes what the reviewers are really honed in on, to see what deliverables they can expect from you in that time. So but just go for it. And if you don't get it the first or the second or the third time, just keep honing that project, keep honing that application, and you just keep going. Like you were saying, you learned from that friend that just like persevered and is crushing it now. And I think it's really important in this space in general to just keep going, keep learning, and, don't get down about it. So that's pretty much what I want to leave people with, just keep going after your dreams.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Zandra. And thank you again, Michelle. So sorry. Natalie and Zandra for coming over. Poe, would you like to come back up, or are you okay with me just wrapping it up? Cool, awesome.
Pawan, thank you so much for the invite. I was really happy to be here. Aquarian, thank you for hosting, and it's lovely to meet you, and I hope that we cross paths again soon.
Same here. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody who came. Thanks everybody who's watching right now. We'll see you again next month. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.